Well, here's a first over at CNN. CNN, of course, is just plain awful. It's so painful to watch. Like it's literally painful I can't watch it without making my skin crawl. This is the place, CNN, where discredited hacks go to get a job after they've been called out. After they've been called out either in a congressional testimony or by other members of the media that actually dig in, journalists who do their job and figure out that this person is lying. That's where they go. Go over to CNN to get a job. So that's exactly what happened to this Miles Taylor guy. You know this guy. He's the guy that worked for Trump in the Department of Homeland Security. Back in August, of course, he released this video. We showed it here. It was a pretty damning video. It was a pro-Biden ad slamming President Trump, saying that he's one of the most disengaged executives that he's ever seen. And he couldn't believe it. So that's why we need to throw our support behind Biden. He said, look, I'm not a Democrat, but we've got to make a change. If you didn't see that ad, here it is.
I served as the chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security under the Donald Trump administration. And it was my job to help the Department of Homeland Security to keep our country safe. What we saw was terrifying. The president wanted to exploit the Department of Homeland Security for his own political purposes and to fuel his own agenda. The California wildfires. He told us to stop giving money to people whose houses had burned down because politically it wasn't a base for him. Month after month, he said he wanted to have a deliberate policy of ripping children away from their parents to show those parents that they shouldn't come to the border in the first place. The cyber attack, terrorism threat. He wasn't interested in those things. He was one of the most unfocused, undisciplined senior executives I've ever encountered. And even though I'm not a Democrat, even though I disagree on key issues, I have to support Joe Biden for president, and I'm confident he won't make the same mistakes as this president.
Defending Democracy Together is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Right, super PAC. So that was the ad, right? Okay. Then President Trump came out and said, I didn't hardly know the guy. I don't even know who he is, and et cetera, et cetera. That's not so bad, right? He's outraged. Okay, wow, this guy, he worked there, and he's outraged about this president. He's coming out and he's talking about it. Well, then we start to peel the onion back on this Miles Taylor, and I'm not discounting that he thought that President Trump was a failure as a president. I give him that. I don't hold that against him. What I do hold against him, though, is the fact that we've learned now, after he admitted this last week, that, of course, he was the guy that back in 2018 penned the now famous anonymous article in the New York Times. Now, at the time, of course, the New York Times lied. I know this is shocking, right? The New York Times lying? They lie all the time. Back then, he penned this op-ed piece for the New York Times talking about how terrible it was to work inside this administration, how disengaged, how tyrannical, and how that there were other members, high-level members of the administration that were actively, in some ways, seeking a coup, trying to undermine him for the safety of America. That we're going to stay here and work anonymously and not tell you our names because we're doing your bidding. We're keeping the country together. Thank God we're working here for you. We're like moles. Well, now we found out last week that that anonymous writer for that piece was none other than Miles Taylor. But of course, the New York Times at the time even lied about who this person was. They claimed in their reporting, and when they wrote this, when they published this piece, that it was from a senior administration official. A senior administration official. Which, by the way, would make it at the level of like Mike Pompeo. You know, Secretary of State level. In fact, Heather Nauert, a former colleague of mine at Fox, who was a State Department spokesperson, remembers how damaging this was because she was being harangued on a regular basis, and this was undermining our ability to get work done in the United States around the world because she was having to answer questions. Is Mike Pompeo the guy that's trying to undermine Trump? Is he the guy? This anonymous? He wrote this? Because it's a senior administration official, so is it Stephen Mnuchin? Is it Mike Pompeo? Is it Ben Carson over at HUD? Wouldn't that be funny, actually? Sleepy Ben Carson writes this piece. That'd be funny. You know, then who else is it? What other member of your cabinet, senior administration official is writing this? Well, it turns out that was a lie. and the New York Times knew it. And the only reason that this story really had any legs was because the New York Times put it out there as a big story by saying it was a senior administration official. Because at the time, so many people were saying the exact same thing as Miles Taylor. CNN was reporting it every night. Rachel Maddow was doing a show on it every night. The opinion pages of the New York Times itself saying the same thing that this opinion piece written by Miles Taylor was saying. There was nothing different. We had already seen the Muslim ban. We already saw a number of things, environmental rollbacks, the sudden withdrawal from the Middle East, cozying up to North Korea. So all of this was already happening. This was nothing new. But again, the reason it was a big deal is because the New York Times lied about it and said that it was a senior administration official. Okay. Now, well, last week, Miles comes out and admits all of this. Fine. But what makes this even more bizarre is that since this ad ran back in August, CNN hired the guy. So as soon as this ad for Biden comes out, a week later, Miles Taylor is now working for CNN. He's now employed by CNN as a CNN analyst. Well, Anderson Cooper interviewed Miles Taylor before he admitted that he was the anonymous guy. He goes on Anderson Cooper's show, and to Anderson Cooper's credit, he was seeing right through this lie. Apparently, he's got some good sources. He knew that Miles Taylor was lying. So he put him right on the spot, and he asked him, are you anonymous? Are you the one that wrote the anonymous piece in the New York Times? Watch how he responds.
There was an op-ed, there was a book by someone calling themselves anonymous. Are you aware of who that is?
I'm not. Look, and that was a parlor game that happened in Washington, D.C. of a lot of folks trying to think of who that might be.
Yeah, it's just a parlor game. I'm not. I don't know who that is. I have no idea. Look, that was just I'm not. And the quick changing of the subject, right? No, I'm not. That was just something in D.C. People just went, it was a parlor game. What's a parlor game? Who even says that? It's like something you say like an H.G. Wells novel. Is there crime afoot? Or is it just a parlor game? A parlor game.
Got my own thoughts about who that might be, but you're not.
I've got my own thoughts as to who that might be. I got my own thoughts as to who that might be. Yeah, I don't know who that might be, but I've got my own thoughts about it.
Own thoughts about who that might be, but you're not anonymous. President, and I certainly don't.
You're not anonymous, though. Look at him smiling. Anderson Cooper smiling. He knows. He knows he's full of shit.
Don't want to. I wear a mask for two things, Anderson: Halloweens and pandemics. So no.
Yeah, he hadn't thought of that answer before. Let me go to my joke book. Hold on, I got my when someone asks me if I'm anonymous joke book. I only wear masks on Halloween and pandemics. Got it right here in my little joke book. So I don't know. I don't know who that is. I don't know who Anonymous is. So he lies straight out to a CNN anchor. So he's hired by the network after they figure out that he's lying. This is what it means to hire over at CNN. And they have a long list of doing this, by the way. So when you see these types of things, when you watch these CNN analysts and you see that they've lied to the American people and now they're being hired to tell you what's the truth, how can you trust the mainstream media? So let me give you a scenario in which you're going to use Miles Taylor for a story. Oh, we've got this story about the Department of Homeland Security, and there was a mysterious overseas trip that President Trump may or may not have met with President Xi of China, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You see how this goes. We want to bring in CNN analyst Miles Taylor to give his perspective on this. Miles, What could you tell us about this mysterious new document that's emerged about President Trump meeting with... Well, I can tell you my time at the Department of Homeland Security, we saw a lot of stuff we weren't happy about with the President of the United States, and et cetera, et cetera. That's your new analyst at CNN. How can we trust anything you're saying? You just lied to one of the flagship anchors on CNN. I mean, how does Anderson Cooper feel about that? In fact, I would love to know if Anderson Cooper ever has him on his show again. Does he have enough say in his own editorial content? He'll be doing election night coverage. Anderson Cooper will. I'm sure along with Chris Cuomo and others. Will they be using this hack? Oh, and by the way, right after that anonymous article was published in the New York Times, he released a book. So look how coordinated all of this was. That book comes out called Anonymous, where he made a lot of money because it skyrocketed right to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah, the New York Times bestseller list. Look, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here. And there's no way, there's no reason to even call it a conspiracy theory. He publishes an op-ed in the New York Times. Then shortly thereafter, the book called Anonymous skyrockets to the top of the New York Times. They lie about it, call him a senior administration official. The next step would be to find out if the New York Times publishing company made any money off of that. But just one thing at a time, Clayton. So there you go. And by the way, I love, you want to go back to this. I can't get over this because this bothers me so much. Going back to his ad. And
I served as the chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security under the Donald Trump administration, and it was my job to help the Department of Homeland Security to keep our country safe. What we saw...
Oh yeah, really? It was my job to keep our country safe. So by you remaining anonymous and pretending to be a senior administration official in cahoots with the New York Times, that was keeping us safe? So you would literally have Mike Pompeo, who's a senior level administration official, being asked questions by foreign leaders as to whether or not he's trying to create a coup in the United States. That's keeping us safe?
Was terrifying. The president wanted to exploit the Department of Homeland Security for his own political purposes and to fuel his own agenda.
Oh, really? That might be true, but you're a liar. It's exactly what you did, Miles Taylor. Exploit the Department of Homeland Security for your own agenda and your own profit making. So you can write a book called Anonymous. Now you're a CNN analyst. You want to exploit? You want to talk about exploitation?
California wildfires. He told us to stop giving money to people whose houses had burned down because politically it wasn't a base for him. Month after month, he said he wanted to have a deliberate policy of ripping children away from their parents to show those parents that they shouldn't come to the border in the first place. A cyber attack, terrorism threat. He wasn't interested in those things. He was one of the most unfocused, undisciplined senior executives I've ever encountered. And even though I'm not a Democrat, even though I disagree on key issues, I have to support Joe Biden for president, and I'm confident he won't make the same mistakes as this president.
Defending the...
There you go. So now I'm working at CNN, and I'll be telling you the truth suddenly. Hey, for his credit, Chris Cuomo called him a liar right on the air. How can anyone trust you? Good for him. That's at least one positive. So Chris Cuomo says, you're a liar. How can anyone trust you? So The Atlantic is having to do a backtrack. I used to really like The Atlantic, but to me, it just goes to show you, I don't know how many of you read The Atlantic, it just goes to show you how these mainstream publications that you've trusted over the years, it's really hard now to just fall in love with a publication by name. Like, oh, I love the New York Times, or I love The Atlantic, or I love The Intercept. Because it's a thing, right? What we really love are the certain writers that you follow, certain personalities, etc. Like you watch this show, hopefully, because you either agree or disagree with what I have to say. We have a good discussion about it, and you know that I'm going to always tell you straight about it. The Atlantic, of course, is a nameless, faceless publication with a bunch of different writers, many of whom I respect and I think do some excellent reporting. But then there are those that aren't. And now this morning, The Atlantic is having to backtrack because of a reporter who, by the way, when she worked for the New Republic, she had been discredited a number of years ago. Her name is Ruth Shalette Barrett. She wrote a number of stories, plagiarized a number of stories, changed the middle initial or middle name Shalette into S so that people would have a harder time figuring out that she had plagiarized stuff in the past, basically trying to hide her past journalism. And then The Atlantic hires her. So she wrote a piece that got a lot of attention just a few weeks ago, which was, I don't know if you saw this, about how Ivy League parents are concerned about the sports injuries that their kids are getting. I think Natalie, you and I even read that article. We were talking about that article. Remember that? About those? Yeah, anyway, she's not paying attention. Remember that article about the Ivy League parents who were upset about their kids sustaining injuries from their sports, like fencing and other things like this? It was a really weird story to kind of come out in the middle of this pandemic. I think it came out in August. Well, Eric Wemple over at the Washington Post, to his credit, started digging into it. And the thing that he's a media critic, one of the things that teed him off about it was like, all these kids that are doing fencing are getting injured? Like they wear a full, like, do you ever see a fencer? They've got like a full bee costume on. Like with a wire the whole thing is like protected. How are you getting an injury from fencing with a little tip? So that was the first thing. He's like, that doesn't seem right. So he started looking into the story. Turns out the whole thing is made up. Ruth, who interviewed this mom of a young fencer at an Ivy League institution, she doesn't even have a son. She doesn't have a kid that fences. So now The Atlantic has had to go through, cull her stories, dig in to find out all of these inaccuracies and made up stuff. It's like the New York Times thing all over again, where these reporters are not leaving their home. They're not doing actual journalism. They're just making up sources. They're making up stories and passing it off as real news. So The Atlantic is now having to backtrack all of this. There are two big stories of the mainstream media lying to you this morning. Let me know your thoughts on this. You can weigh in on the chat below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, by the way. It's very easy to subscribe to the channel. Just hit the little subscribe button and smash that like button if you want to support independent journalism. And it gets us out in front of more people who need to hear these stories. So thank you so much for doing that.